we're not going to get change from this Labour government, but hopefully it'll be the government after this one.
And we're not just simply a Bank of England where they can take as much money as they can from us until the time comes that they can ship themselves back to whichever country they came from or wherever they want to go.
I see change coming. I see what's happening across Western Europe. I see the last 2 weeks of the first, Trump's administration, and I'm looking at all this change, and we're not going to get change from this Labour government, but hopefully it'll be the government after this one. Can you see change coming?
I can see some positive change coming, and it puts me in this way. If Trump is staying 5 strong years at the level that he's continuing now, for example, yesterday abolishing DEI in sports, no transgender women in sports. If he then also translates the view of no DEI in financial services and bans companies that are outside of the United States from being able to even trade in the United States if they have DEI, that will force companies and banks in our countries to actually remove that as well, and in Europe. If he is then able to sustain that into a next election where it's not necessarily him standing, but Vance is able to continue that agenda, and we get 10 or 15 years of America doing this, then absolutely, then there'll be no choice for big businesses and corporates to turn away from that. Then here, we need to find the party like Reform performing in such a way, and I think they'll achieve that in Wales next year, that they actually engender enough strength to win first past the post. And then have enough individuals, maybe learn from what Trump is doing with Elon Musk and others, to actually have a team in place ready to go after the civil service and also other entities within our own deep state that don't want to change this. Firing people across institutions such as the National Trust, removing funding from any organization that carries on with this agenda, abolishing the Department of Education, replacing it with education for children, not education for politics and political agendas. That's what I would like to see. Old school in many ways. And if we can do that, that will work.
What I think you've just said then is basically the UKIP struggle was the first part of the problem to solve. Now we've left the EU, this is the next fight, and it's going to take several decades, just like UKIP took several decades. This next fight is going to take several decades if we're going to get this country back.
So, Nick, do I think there's some element of us being able to be successful in the future and what happens with our country? It goes back to something that in your book, which I've read, which I'd encourage people to read, My England, My England. And at the very beginning of that, you have a phrase by Elizabeth I, which I used to quote in my speeches, and it is, "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and a king of England too." Our nation has faced huge difficulties when people from the elites have taken over, whether they are military elites like the Romans or the Normans, to those of our political elites who were heading up our countries in the times of Peterloo, or the Pentridge martyrs, or the Tolpuddle martyrs. And on each occasion that we've faced them, we've been able to transform our nation back somewhat to the way that it was. In the terms of the Romans, they put their culture across their country and destroyed the Britons and the Angles that were there. And so when they went, we started to reimpose our culture once again. With the Normans, slightly different. They imposed Norman culture, but only a few of them. But they allowed our kind of laws and common law system to remain in place. And actually what we did is the elites began to see that was actually a much better way. And that led us to the Wars of the Roses and indeed our own civil war that brought back that English culture once again. Whether it was the people of this country challenging those elites and being brutalized or shipped off to Australia, as many of them did, or being hung, drawn, and quartered if they challenged the authorities, We've got similar elements going on now. You and I have both been cancelled. That's the modern day equivalent of being hung, drawn, and quartered. But if we are able to bring ourselves together once more with those people who've come and lived in this country, who recognize the importance of our common law, our history, our legal systems, then once again, I think that we can actually bring some semblance of what England and Britain is again. Not quite as it always was, but maybe still maintain some of the most important parts of our history.
I can completely agree. I don't think anybody wants England to remain static, to always be what it's always been, because that's never been a time that's existed. Countries, people, culture is constantly changing, but that change is always at an acceptable pace. Sometimes there's spikes, when the printing press was invented, now the internet's been invented. There's times that give us problems because we don't know how to cope with it. But change comes slowly, and change comes through consent. Because if it's not consent, then it's war. And we need to avoid going down, the path that leads to violence.
I agree. We should never go down to the path that leads to violence, but violence occurs only when the elites have led themselves to be in such a material sense of power and influence and ignorance of the needs of the people of their country. We have seen that through our history, and there is a thread. There is a thread of what it means to be English, whether it is still the fact that we've got 80% of our DNA in most of the people in this country that can go back to before 1066. That thread of what it is, and that culture that we talked about early on, Nick, about the art and the history, the poetry, the films, the idea of what it means to be part of being English through our political changes, our and indeed our cultural diversity that we had before the changes that occurred after 1950 with different countries coming in. We had England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales integrating as well. So all of that is still the thread that makes this nation great. All we need to do is encourage people who have come here to understand that thread. And some do. A friend of mine who is Polish, he came here, and after 6 years, he learned about England, and he went for his own nationality exam and became a citizen of Great Britain. And he loved it. He stood there in front of a picture of the king and sang the national anthem. I have seen images of people accepting nationality and wearing their own scarves or their own flags and not supporting the nation that they're in. That's not integration. But there are those from different countries who believe that it's important to be here. And we're not just simply a Bank of England where they can take as much money as they can from us until the time comes that they can ship themselves back to whichever country they came from or wherever they want to go.
And that's a good point, because that's what England and the UK has become. We've become a cross between an international airport lounge and an economic zone. People come here, some of them very good, but they come here to benefit themselves. And if a better place turns up somewhere in the world or a better opportunity, they then go there. And if this country fails tomorrow, and let's say, the Bank of England collapses, our pound ends up being worth a penny, the mass exodus from this country of people who've only been here 10, 20, 30 years would put the Bible to shame, the exodus we would see, because many people have not bought into this country. Many people have come here because it was more convenient and a better option than living where they were living. And a country can't exist like that. We had some questionnaires last year on young people. It was something like 40, 50% of young people aged between 18 and 35 who were the fighting young people said they wouldn't fight for the country. How are we going to exist if the people living wouldn't fight a war for this country? And it wasn't like we're going to send you to Iraq. They were talking about if this country was going to be invaded, and they still wouldn't fight. That's the damage that's been done by our external enemies, making us weaker, making us less patriotic, so we're easier to defeat in the future.
Well, I would say that, but also, there is another reason why people no longer want to fight for this country. And that is because if you are a white working class individual in this country, what are you actually fighting for? You're fighting for diversity, DEI, or you're fighting for your voice to be crucified if you challenge the elites. If you see those people who come from the military, the way that they've been attacked for actually being in Northern Ireland or in Afghanistan, for the actions that they've done, for the flags of your country not being allowed to be flown, and if you do, being regarded as a racist. If you are regarding yourself as English, you're a second-class citizen in England. If you're Scottish or Welsh, then or Irish, we'll celebrate your National Saints' Day with marches in London and pubs that you can go to and visit. But you won't do it on St. George's Day or any other of our major feasts. So if you have that culturally within your own country, and then secondly, you look around the elites, we have billionaires who've been running the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, and controlling the agenda in this country and pushing down our wages with mass immigration. And if you look at nations like Russia or China, whose sole goal is to support their own citizens, just in the way that Donald Trump is now saying we support the citizens of the United States, but we're willing to give our political institutions power to the European Union. We're allowed others to come into this country and dilute our culture and our history. Again, you will look at those countries and go, well, if they invaded us, how would my life change? If you are a poorer plumber or electrician in this country, and you thought to yourself, I have Putin or the Chinese in charge, how much different would it be to my life? Well, actually, you might say, well, we probably won't have as much mass immigration into our country. We won't have the destruction of our Christian backgrounds if it was Russia. And actually, my life wouldn't change dramatically. But the ones who would are those who go to Oxford and Cambridge and Eton, who are running our countries. Maybe they wouldn't be in power. But I doubt it. And that's what they're doing. They've got twofold arguments. One is nothing would actually change if a different country come in. And if I did, what am I fighting for? Because the people I'm fighting for actually hate me. And that is why I think there's such a now destruction of the belief in this country and the support of it. And I think that's really what they want.
I think our enemies definitely do want that. All we have to look is, 150, 100 years ago, look at the Vichy government in France. They were French. They would call themselves patriots, French patriots running the country on behalf of Nazi Germany. And that's what some of our elites would do if we were invaded. But that's what the elites are doing now. They're doing it on behalf of the European Union, on the behalf of the WAF. They're already traitorous now, and they'll do anything for power. There's always been people in our societies who are quite willing to be traitors if it gets them a better quality of life and if it gives them power. We always have to be careful of traitors.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And the reason we lost 1066 is because a cousin of Harold actually went over and supported William. So we've always got those people who are willing to stab their own citizens in their back just so that they can get a nicer house, a bigger estate, or a membership of the House of Lords, or indeed they sit in some non-governmental organization or a company that they can give money to in terms of funding and receive some government grants back or reduction in taxes. All of those are happening. And I agree with you very much on this particular point, is that when you have a prime minister that has openly said on television that he prefers Davos to Parliament, that is exactly the pinnacle of the types of individual who are happier in the comfort of the individuals who are already in power at Davos or the World Economic Forum or those elitist groups, because that's where they feel that they want to be. And it doesn't matter that you're a Labour prime minister or a Conservative prime minister. I want a prime minister that actually wants to leave those institutions, looks down upon the people that go there, want to abolish any funding to companies involved and organized by it. I want them to remove themselves from that and say no more. That's the kind of prime minister who's willing to do all of that I would actually support. And I look across the very large ocean between ourselves and the United States, and I see them doing that. And that is something that I think is defense of your nation state and your people.